Way back before the pandemic began, I had a question. What does it take for a city person to go country? In February, I recorded most of the interviews for the first season. I had planned to launch in April of 2020, the 5-year anniversary of the project. But then, everything turned upside down, and it just didn't feel like the right time to launch because so much had changed overnight. As the initial shock of the pandemic wore off, it became clear that many people with the means to do so were leaving cities. Recent data has shown that nearly 16 million people have relocated in the U.S. this year, making the concept of an urban exodus even more relevant. So while some of the interviews in this season were conducted before the pandemic, the topics they discuss, the questions they raise, and the answers they provide are more urgent than ever. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. Many people feel called to farming, motivated by a desire to reconnect with their food, become more self-sufficient, and to provide nourishment for others. A common mistake that new farmers make is trying to grow, do, and raise everything all at once. Another common mistake is not paying close enough attention to the numbers and changing your business model when things aren't turning a profit. Many new farms fold before they are able to reach financial stability. For Bailey Hale and Thomas McCurdy, their pathway into building a farm-based business had a learning curve, but they were eventually able to make it work by abandoning their dream of a goat dairy and instead returning to their career roots working in flowers and pastries. When Bailey and Thomas first met in 2011, Bailey was already working towards becoming more self-sufficient. He had recently converted his small Philadelphia lot into an urban haven.
And at that point, I had a small garden and beehives and chickens right in the middle of Philadelphia. I had just really become concerned about where food was coming from and was doing a lot of reading, Michael Pollan, all the political food politics reading. And so I just started doing whatever I could on my small lot next to my house. And then when Thomas met me, I think he was a little scared of me to start with because I had brooders of baby chicks in my bedroom, but that didn't scare him away. So he pretty quickly got on board with really kind of my 5 or 10 year vision was to move out of the city. But it only took us about 6 months after we left, or after we met rather, to pack up and move to the country and try it for real.
As Bailey mentioned, he had, I think, 3 brooders of baby chicks in his bedroom, and he had all sorts of poultry in the backyard and beehives. The night that we met, he told me that his dream was to start farming sooner than later, to leave the city and become a farmer. And I thought he was absolutely crazy because I grew up in rural North Dakota, where the only farms are just big, multi-generation corn and soybean and wheat and sugar beet farms. And the idea of someone just deciding to become a farmer was really foreign to me. I had no context at all. But as Bailey said, I pretty quickly warmed up to the idea. I was in pastry school at the time. I've always been a food person. And what I've said in the past is I think that a love of food very naturally lends itself to an interest in farming and where food comes from.
Both of you grew up in rural settings, but you decided to move to the city as young adults. What was your childhood like, and were you nervous at all to return to rural America?
I, again, grew up in rural North Dakota, a small town of about 8,000 or 9,000 people, and it was very much a big fish, small pond situation. I was the only out gay person in my high school and was very theatrical and musical. And I just couldn't wait long enough to spread my wings and fly to the big city. And I could have never, ever imagined myself moving back to rural life. I really enjoyed urban living and all the conveniences and the queer culture that came with it. But now here we are, almost 10 years later, and I can't imagine living anywhere else now. At the time, it didn't feel crazy or risky at all. I think all of our friends and family were really quite skeptical of these 2 people who just met, leaving everything they know to go do something completely new. But at the time, it just felt really right, I think, for both of us. We had no reservations about any of the steps that we took.
Tell us a little bit about your experience renting farmland. Would you recommend renting first before buying to people who want to make this transition?
We rented 2 farms in Schoharie County, New York. Not at the same time. We found a dairy farmer who was struggling in a big way. And he had renovated a little apartment, really without a plan for what it was for. But he let us rent there and gave us some access to the barn and to the pasture. And that's where we first had our goats and sheep and pigs. We brought all of our chickens and ducks and turkeys with us from Philadelphia. Renting is always a difficult situation. You have to deal with the personality of the landowner, especially if they are a farmer. They have their ideas about how you should do things, and it may not actually line up with how you want to do things. So that definitely caused some stress, and that's part of why that arrangement only lasted for about a year. And then we rented our second farm just 10 minutes from the first farm, and that was also kind of awkward in a different situation, just interpersonal conflicts with the landlord. That said, I'm really glad we didn't just buy a farm to start with and really just decide if this was a life for us. And after those first 2.5 years, we knew that this was the life we wanted, but that we needed to buy our own place. And that really gave us the confidence to seek that out.
Neither of us really came from tremendous wealth or had huge nest eggs. And so when we decided to start farming, our only option was to find a rental opportunity. But I think if we had the resources at that time, it's very likely we would have just shopped around and found some farms somewhere to purchase. But I'm really grateful that that wasn't the case. And there was plenty of stress at both rental situations. But as Bailey mentioned, it really worked out for the best that we were able to rent 2 different farms during our tenure there in central New York, because the farms were so different from one another with regard to the kind of land or barns, water sources, electricity. And so we had sort of a 2.5-year crash course determining exactly what we wanted or didn't want in our eventual farm of our own.
You cut your teeth farming on rented land and got married on your second farm in upstate New York in 2013. What gave you the push or capital investment to purchase your own land?
Earlier that year, my grandmother, Ardelia, had passed away, and she left money to her grandchildren. And that's really what allowed us to consider buying a farm. We couldn't have done it without her generosity.
What do you love about living in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont?
The Northeast Kingdom is a really special place. It's really very remote and rural and really quite poor and impoverished, but people are really honest and hardworking. It's only relatively recently that you can find a big supermarket up here. I mean, Walmart just came a year and a half ago. So traditional skills are not radical or cool up here. You know, if you want pork, you just raise pigs. That's how it's done. It's not like those skills have been forgotten and then relearned. They're still quite active here. And we've really appreciated being accepted into the community. We always say that in New York, we raise our pigs outside on pasture. We'd have people pull in to scold us and tell us that we shouldn't raise pigs outside. That's not how you raise pigs. But when we moved to Vermont, people would see our pigs out, actually in our front yard for a while. We used them to kind of tear up the sod. People pulled in and they were just so excited that someone had bought this old farm. And even if they didn't really know what we were up to, they were just happy to see someone buying a farm and trying to make a run at farming. It's a really agricultural area. And dairy farms are going under left and right here. Really, any kind of farming is embraced and encouraged in this area.
I think it's worth noting, too, that in New York, we definitely felt like those gay farmers down the road, and people really liked putting us into a box. Whereas up here, almost right away, we realized that we were just those new farmers down the road who bought that old dairy farm and were bringing it back to life. And in our 6 years that we've been here, even though it's, again, a very rural community, we're on a gravel road, off a gravel road. Most of our neighbors have lived on this road for generations and might not think that they know any queer people at all. We've experienced absolutely no animosity or negativity towards the nature of our family whatsoever. People have been really warmly welcoming. If they have any opinions, they keep them to themselves.
I think people are better than we give them credit for. You know, we see all these divisive issues on social media and on television all the time that make you think that no one's going to like you or you're going to get beat up. And granted, that does happen. But I think once people meet other people, you find common ground. You know, we do feel safe in Vermont. It's a very live and let live kind of place. You may have your own opinions, but you generally keep them to yourself unless they're directly interfering with how you live your life. I think that's why the back to the land movement really flourished here, was because people have their business and you have your business, and you don't make other people's business your business unless absolutely necessary. Certainly visiting places and trying out locations, just trying to find someone locally to give you some insight as to the lay of the land.
This episode is brought to you by the workshops at Howe Farm, a new photography and creative workshop series. The workshops at Howe Farm offer learning experiences that encourage you to experiment with new techniques, hone your creative vision, and advance your professional opportunities. Join celebrated New York City photographer Toots in his Manifesting a Creative Career course and learn how to leverage your personal photography projects to get new clients. This 4-week workshop runs January 9th through 30th and meets weekly on Zoom. Check out Howe Farm's full offering of winter and spring classes at howehillfarm.com, spelled Howe, and stay up to date by following @HowHillFarm on Instagram.
Early in your farming journey, you were doing lots of things to earn a living. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made it work in the beginning?
I would say it wasn't until we moved up here to Vermont that we really started making any money at all from the farm. So for the first 2.5 years, it was really just an expensive hobby. And we had a sizable herd of goats and sheep and probably a couple hundred poultry and lots of pigs, and weren't making any money from them at all. So that's why one or both of us was working full-time off the farm throughout that entire period. But we were never really discouraged by that. And we knew at the time that we were learning. We had a lot to learn. Every season, we felt that we were just getting closer and closer to a viable business. But it wasn't until we moved here to Vermont that the bakery and flower farm sort of emerged through the goat, sheep, and poultry hobby. The initial plan, when we left Philadelphia, the first business plan was to move towards a goat and sheep dairy and producing cheese, selling liquid milk, and also selling eggs and pork. Sort of that idyllic farmstead idea that so many have when they leave the city, that they want to do everything. And we weren't quite able to make that work, but we're very quick to determine if something isn't working and then shift gears and figure out a plan B. That has certainly benefited us throughout these years, that we're not afraid to take some twists and turns and rewrite a business plan.
What made you realize that going back to your former career roots of flowers and pastries was the best way to build a viable farm-based business?
I think it was quite by accident. We moved up here to Vermont. We had no jobs, no money. Bills were piling up. But we had all these eggs from all of our chickens, and Thomas is a pastry chef. So I just said, hey, can we bake something with these eggs and sell it somewhere? So we just started looking around and found a couple tiny farmers markets. And they let us start showing up. And, we might have been selling $150 or $200 per market, but we thought that was amazing that we could, take a product that we raised and add value to it. So that's really where we turned the corner. When we left Philadelphia, I had planned to grow some flowers. I thought maybe peonies. I wasn't really, I thought it'd be part of a bigger picture. And I think this fall of our first year here, I went to a meeting of the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. And I really felt like I had found my tribe when I went to that meeting. Because I have the horticultural background in education, and I also know what cut flowers should look like after working as an event florist for so many years. I came back from that meeting just energized, and I declared that we were now a cut flower farm, and Thomas, as he so patiently has done before, went along with my ideas. So yeah, it's more out of necessity that we adapted our business, but looking back, it makes total sense that a pastry chef and a florist would be baking and working with flowers.
Going back to flowers and pastries was a light bulb moment, but things really changed for the better when Thomas got a call from the Burlington Farmers Market.
One of the board members of the Burlington Farmers Market reached out to us just to say, hey, I follow you guys on Instagram and I really like what you're up to. We could use a new baker at our farmers market here and you should apply. Previously, we would have never even considered that market because it's 2 hours away. It's really big. And it just wasn't even on my radar. But we did apply and we got in. We've now been there for 5 years.
How did you ramp up your floral business and learn what types of flowers were best for you to grow in Vermont's very short growing season?
So I think in our first season, we planted everything. It was a hodgepodge of any seed or bulb I could get my hands on. Some worked and a lot didn't work. I think October of that year, I looked over in the corner of our greenhouse and I saw my sweet peas were still flowering. And I thought to myself, that's kind of unusual. Sweet peas are generally thought of as a spring flower. It's like, why are these surviving? Well, we're really cold here. We're, a little zone 3 frost pocket. We're down in the 40s and low 50s every night. I thought about the liability of growing in this cold climate, but I hadn't really considered the possibilities that growing in a cold zone affords you. So the next year I planted a larger row of sweet peas. It turns out they were also very happy. I also found a wedding florist at that time who I thought I was planting way too many, and she would have taken 10 times what I grew that first year. So we increased that the next year, and also realized that even an hour south of us, it's too hot to produce them all summer long. So we're one of the few places in the U.S. that can actually produce this one product really well at a time when no one else in the country can do it. We just saw that opening in the market, and we really fine-tuned the business to meet that. This year we'll have 4 entire greenhouses full of sweet peas, and we'll probably have 5 or 6 full-time people just tending them. We get calls from wholesalers all over the country now. We have a long list of people waiting to buy them, and we're just trying to meet that demand.
How did your early days of farming in Vermont compare to your experience now?
When we first moved to Vermont, we were on food stamps and collecting SNAP benefits because every dime that we had was going to the feed store so we could buy grain for all of our goats, sheep, pigs, and poultry. And so it feels really amazing that in the span of just 5 years, we've gone from being on SNAP benefits to being able to provide. Last year, we had 5 full-time seasonal employees, and one of them is actually full-time year-round. And we really pride ourselves in paying a good living wage. And our year-round employee receives full health benefits, and we really do our best to be right by our crew. And it feels amazing to be able to provide jobs to our neighbors.
So we very quickly decided we would not develop a business that relied on free or cheap labor. Sometimes people ask if they can come volunteer. It's not a nonprofit. We're a business. So we need to compensate people for their time and compensate them well. But we can't have a business that's based on cheap labor. We don't believe in treating people that way. And if we can't create good jobs while building our business, then we just will change our business model or not farm. We'll just go get desk jobs or something. But fortunately, we've been able to keep the business afloat while paying a good wage. So we're really proud of that.
Has your definition of success or what you value changed since you've moved here?
Initially, success was just staying afloat. And that's really, the biggest first step when you're starting a farm-based business. I think success now is saving for retirement. And, we try to travel at least a couple weeks in the wintertime. That really keeps us sane and keeps us possible what we're doing. But yeah, I think the definition has changed. When we first started, we really thought we had to work 80-hour weeks, and we were doing it wrong if we weren't miserable and just, broke. You can only do that for so many years. So we don't work past 5 or 6 in the evening now. We try to prioritize our own mental health. Got to say, we have to make all of our money in half the year, you do have to hustle a lot in the summertime. That work-life balance is something we think about, at least. Many farmers don't stop to consider that.
As the years have gone on, our dreams have gotten bigger and bigger. When we first started out, as Bailey mentioned, the goals or our idea of success would be just to be able to pay our bills on time and stay afloat.
This season of the Urban Exodus podcast is brought to you by Jake.art. Bring the beauty of the outdoors in. Search their collection of affordable, high-quality fine art prints by color or theme to find just the right work for your home or office. Whether you need a visual escape into the beauty of the natural world while stuck indoors, or want to send a thoughtful gift over the holidays, Jake.art, that's JAKE.ART, has you covered. Enter the code URBANEXODUS, all one word, at checkout for 15% off your order now through January 1st.
Bailey and Thomas are honest and open about the privileges they have been afforded that have allowed them to take bigger risks and build their farm business to the success that it is today. I so appreciate their transparency, as this isn't something that typically is discussed.
Before my grandmother passed away and left money, we had no idea how we would ever buy our own farm. So we fully acknowledge the advantage and the privilege that we've been given through my grandmother's generosity. I should say we own our farm outright. We don't have a mortgage. And that's just immense because we can take a lot of chances. We don't have a big payment looming over us. Our expenses are really low for living, which has given us a lot of freedom to try things and make mistakes without it being a detriment.
Do you want to dispel any myths about building a sustainable farm business?
It's not easy. Anyone who tells you it is not telling you the truth. We have a system that's rigged to support only the biggest operations. And unfortunately, that results in a poor health outcome for many Americans.
You've been on your land now for over half a decade. Have you noticed the effects of climate change in your area?
We've noticed some changes, warmer weather. We generally haven't had rain or ice in the wintertime. We only have snow and more snow and more snow. But even this winter, every big snow is followed by a thaw and an ice event. We're not dropping down to that negative 35 that we did our first couple winters. We've maybe touched 20 below one time, but that's a big change. We were just in Europe and talking to people from Scandinavia, and they're not getting snow there either, only rain. I think the climate is changing much faster than it's being reported to us. Mm-hmm. We feel fortunate here in Vermont that we have a long way to warm up before we can't grow things. But the global South doesn't have that luxury. I think it should be the absolute utmost important issue of our time.
What advice do you have for people who want to follow in your footsteps and build a farm?
Just keeping your expenses as low as possible is really the smartest thing you can do. And that's going to be a different equation for every person, whether they're renting or whether they start on a half acre rather than the 10 acres that they want. But you're really reducing your debts and your overhead you have to pay out every month. It really gives you a lot of freedom to make mistakes because you will make a lot of mistakes. You got to make a lot of mistakes till you figure out what works and what doesn't work. Also, I think just figuring out what you're passionate about and maybe using skills you already have in a new way. So we tried to reinvent ourselves by starting a goat dairy, and we didn't really know anything about that. And I think I'm glad we did that. It really taught us a lot about raising food and what goes into raising meat and dairy. But here we are back with our flowers and pastry. I've been growing flowers since I was 5 years old, and Thomas has been baking his whole life. So if you can turn your passion into an agricultural business or something that works in the rural environment, follow your gut and try to adapt what you already love into a business.
Absolutely. I would say too, putting in the time and energy to seek out the resources that are available to you. We were helped tremendously by, as we mentioned, the Intervale Center over near Burlington, Vermont, that has this free resource for new and beginning farmers to have business advice, whether it's writing a business plan or figuring out a marketing plan or just figuring out what you want to grow. And that proved to be an invaluable resource for us. And then we went on to develop a great relationship with our local NRCS office through the USDA and learned how to apply for different kinds of grants and have been able to really improve our property tremendously with grant monies over the years, whether it's building a couple of greenhouses or fencing in our back pasture. Early on, all of that seemed really daunting to us. It was just a whole world of bureaucracy and paperwork about which we really knew nothing. But putting in the time and energy to learn how to navigate that system has been a huge help for us. And there, at least for us here in Vermont, there are so many resources out there. I think someone starting out, it'd be a great use of time.
Something that has served us really well is just keeping an eye on our numbers almost obsessively and being honest with yourself when something is losing money and being willing to change course. It was really hard to get rid of the dairy goats. I came at this really from an animal rights perspective. I didn't eat meat for 10 years, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know where it was coming from. And so I really thought that we were going to save animal agriculture and raise meat, eggs, and dairy in a more humane way. and make a living doing it. But the cards are stacked against you. It's really difficult, unless you're at a pretty large scale, to make that equation work. So we had to get rid of that. And we still do some meat production for our own homestead use, which is, still really rewarding, but we're not feeding New York City. We're just feeding ourselves. I think really being adaptable and keeping an eye on the bottom line. If this is a business and not a hobby, really looking at your numbers critically from day one. It's one of the best bits of advice I can get and what has served us so well.
I would agree. Of course, it's really important to be passionate and to follow one's dream, but we've seen a good number of farmers starting out who seem so committed to just one singular idea and have been unwilling to waver or adapt at all, and has potential to be one's downfall, an inability to change one's path as needed.
My first interview with Bailey and Thomas was in February of 2020. I recorded another interview with them in late March because it felt like the whole world had turned upside down. This was recorded after most of our country had gone into lockdown, when grocery store shelves were bare and everyone was glued to their phones watching the nightmare unfold. It was a really uncertain and scary time. First off, how are you two doing?
We're doing okay, all things considered. Just taking it day by day. Some days are harder than others, but we're really just trying to focus on the positive and realizing how fortunate we are to be living on a farm right now and to have access to land so we can go for a walk in the fresh air, and to have freezers full of meat from last year's pig crop, and to have several trays full of veggie seeds started. We feel as safe as one can feel given the circumstances.
When we left the city in 2011, in some respects, we've been preparing for this a bit. We're not big preppers. We don't have a basement full of supplies, but we've just taught ourselves how to raise food and how to be a little more self-sufficient. So we feel secure for ourselves, but we also feel really concerned and upset for other people who don't have land, who don't have greenhouses, who don't know how to grow food.
Yeah.
It's just such a disconcerting time for everybody.
How is your community weathering this?
If we could actually come together, I think we would feel better. I think we would feel we would be more aware of the sense of community around us. That said, we're seeing a lot of people join together to help make sure everyone's fed, make sure people are looked after, make sure they have their basic needs. Mm-hmm. But the longer this goes on, the more we're all going to have to do to make sure that we're all good. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, technology has been great. We've been able to keep track of our friends and communicate safely. But I know there's people who aren't able to communicate as we are, who don't have internet access, who don't have computers. And I really worry about those people.
Do you think the pandemic will encourage more people to leave the city and move to rural America?
Where we live now is so remote and rural, and that's one of the things we love about it. And because of that, farmland is still relatively affordable up here compared to surrounding areas. And we're curious to see how much of that land is snatched up.
What lessons do you hope society learns from this very difficult time?
Yeah, I think we live in such a poor area. We see such vulnerable people all the time who are having a really difficult time before we even heard about this virus. So I'm hoping the more privileged amongst us are going to have their eyes opened a bit, realize how important it is that we figure out universal health care. You're seeing people thrown off, they're unemployed now, and many of those no longer have health benefits. And it's just not a way we should be treating humans. And I if this doesn't open people's eyes, well, I won't say I have no faith in humanity, but this has got to do it.
Since we spoke in March, Bailey and Thomas have had to get creative and pivot their business to survive. They stopped vending at the Burlington's Farmers Market and instead moved their efforts to home food delivery. Thomas's new business, Kingdom Direct, offers prepared meals, baked goods, and pantry staples sourced from local farms. They deliver orders throughout northern Vermont. Bailey has moved from sweet pea blooms to seed cultivation, and they now offer a wide selection of sweet pea seed varieties. You can learn more about Ardelia Farm by visiting their website, ardeliafarm.com, or follow them on Instagram at Ardelia Farm. Join us next Saturday for my conversation with Jason and Lorraine Contreras, the founders of Sow the Land. A battle with cancer motivated this family of three to sell most of their belongings, quit their careers, drive across the country, and buy a single wide trailer with 1 acre of land to homestead in the mountains of North Carolina. You can find us on Instagram at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks that ditched the city and went country, visit our website, urbanexodus.com. Urban Exodus is a tremendous labor of love. If you like the content we create, please consider supporting our efforts on Patreon. An enormous thank you to my incredible team that have helped make this podcast possible. Production by Simone Leon, editing and writing by Ari Snyder, and music by Benjamin Bethurum. I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is the Urban Exodus. Stay joyful, stay kind, stay resilient.